And at this point, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jim Tu, who is with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. He is a professor emeritus here at The Ohio State University, where he was in the Bee Lab for years. Teaches extensively across the country to beekeepers, both through electronic means and in person. He's also an author, written Wisdom for Beekeepers, 500 Tips for Successful Beekeeping. And when I called Jim and I said, Jim, would you come back to the webinar? He's been a faithful contributor to our OSU Bee Lab webinar for the last 5 years. He said, yeah, let's talk about how to keep bees alive. So Jim, happy to have you here this morning. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Denise, first of all, thank you for tolerating me and mentoring me in this process and helping me do it. Secondly, to all you people who have gotten up in different time zones, some of you quite early, to hear what I'm about to say, I want you to know that at once I am both humbled and intimidated, and I'll do the best I can in the comments that follow. I chose this bizarre topic because it's primarily my feelings, my experiences with my own bees. In my title slide, when I photographed that bee to put here in the title slide for you, I have no idea why that bee's dead. She appears to be in the absolute epitome pink of health, and yet she was, in some ways, beautifully dead. So it's frustrating, and this topic is kind of frustrating. So I'd like to see if I can put a spin on it, that there's things you can do, there's things the bees have to do, and then at times you both just lose. So I have the caveat underneath my title here that keeping bees alive, or at least most of them, because sometimes the bees are going to go. They just are designed to die. So, off the bat, I want you to expect some colony deaths. Bees have always died, both beekeeper bees and wild bees. So in the wild, where they do their own thing, they die just as frequently, or maybe, depending on the weather, more so, but there's a lot of ifs and ands about that. Beekeepers' bees have always died. I guess I have the, good fortune, bad fortune, to have kept bees before Africanized bees, before all the mites. In the old days, even without these issues, our bees died. We had winter kills. So don't think that bees dying is a new thing. Now, whether or not they're dying to a greater extent, I'll explore that in a bit. But now, having reassured you that death in the bee world is remarkably natural, they only live 4 to 5 to 6 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks in the summer, maybe 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months in the winter, but they have a very short lifespan. So having reassured you about all this death and die-off, let me tell you, it's still not a good thing. It's messy and smelly to clean up. It's not a happy job. It's not one of the selling points for beekeeping. It's expensive. If I can reminisce just for a second, and I promise I won't live in the past too much, I used to buy queens for 75 cents. $1.25 was a lot of money. When they went to $2.50, it was exorbitant. You could buy 2, 3, 4, and 5 pound packages. And you never paid more than $8 a package. $15 was a lot. Now, when I go up and pick up my packages, and they're well north of $100, $130 or whatever, I do stand there and reminisce, and I do have to go home and explain to my wife why I'm spending a significant amount of money on 7, 8, 9 packages of bees. So it's expensive for us to replace those bees. It's one of the reasons that bee populations have declined, is because as they've died off, the expense of replacing them is so great. And for all of us, for me, having done this for more than 4 decades, for you, having done it for less than a year, the stress of having your bees die has a psychological effect on you. It's not a bright thing, not a bright moment. So even though bees naturally die, they die fairly shortly after they're born, the short life frame, short life cycle, we still don't enjoy that. It's a very personal thing for us. Yes, they die in the winter, and it's winter kills that we worry about, but they can actually die any other season too, from robbing, from going queenless. So there's no particular time. First off, in many cases this is going to be impractical for some of you, but I'd like you to think in apiaries, not in hives. It's difficult, sometimes impractical, to keep a single colony. And before that even settles for a moment, let me say, however, there's oftentimes proper reasons for ignoring that. If you got bees on the 6th floor balcony in some large city, I wouldn't suggest you put 10 colonies there. One's probably going to be enough. But keeping your bees alive is remarkably difficult for the person who just has one hive. You can't make mistakes, your bees can't make mistakes, or they're going to really suffer. And in most areas, even the Deep South, in most areas, when the winter season comes, whether it be cold or simple lack of food production availability, those colonies, that one colony is going to have trouble making it. So you have to requeen the one colony sometime way back in early spring. And the requeening is successful. Well, nonetheless, the colony is set back for about a month, 6 weeks or so while that's happening. And then that means it's probably not going to be really properly prepared for winter. So if you just got one hive, you're going to need some good luck, you and the bees both. So generally a couple of colonies at least. Having said that, I just told you a bit ago how expensive these bees are. If you're new at it, you're not certain that you want to do it, maybe reasons to go slow. But if you're new at it, you're not certain you want to do it, and you get one hive and it dies, then it's probably going to throw you the wrong way. So this is not an easy call. But even those of you who have 10 colonies of bees in one yard, and certainly commercial beekeepers do this. This is where I basically got the concept. If one queen is bad and they're all the same age, then the other queens are probably not going to be too far behind. So if you keep your operation kind of steady state, what you've done to one, you've done to others, you reduce record keeping, you reduce complexity, you standardize everything, and it tends to make one colony like the others. So if one does become queenless, broodless, whatever, you can parasitize the other, keep them all built back up. So there's some good things to be said about 2 or 3 hives of bees minimally. There's some good things to be said about keeping the hive standardized so you can help them survive in this box that we're giving them. And lastly, the apiary location. There's entire articles, there are presentations, everything on finding an apiary location. Honestly, all you do is you find the best location you can. I just picked out a yard. I'm going to be writing about it in Bee Culture magazine. Right now it's just scrub, brush, and overgrowth. It doesn't face the right way. I'm not sure about wind drafts. I don't know what the apiary location is for nectar sources. So why would you choose it? I chose it because I could get it. And sometimes it's hard to get locations. The number one thing that I wanted from my apiary location to help keep my bees alive is to be able to get to them year-round. So I would be prepared to sacrifice other positive attributes just to be able to get to them. In the past, there's been seasonal rainstorms, gigantic mud pools, there's been deep snow in some cases here in Ohio, and if you leave them alone for excessive time to their own devices, sometimes when you do finally get back to them, things are so far gone that you're going to have trouble bringing them back. So overall, I'd like for you as much as possible to recommend to you to help keep your bees alive, to standardize them as much as possible, and as much as possible have them in a yard where you can get to them year-round. Secondly, or thirdly, or wherever I am, a lot of this is up to you. You are the general physician of your colonies of bees. You're the one who makes the initial decision on what your colonies should have done to them, what they're going to need. So as you slug it out, as you stay in beekeeping and make mistakes and do some things right and grow, you will get better at it. I wish you wouldn't obsess. I used to talk to people a lot who just had gone bonkers for bees. They almost had every one of them named. They were hypothetically checking to be sure they were all home at night. Don't do all that. These are wild animals, and let them be wild as much as you can. Help them, but don't hover over them. Beekeeping should be challenging, but it should also be enjoyable for 99% of you who've tuned in here today. That leads right into keeping bees is simple, but it's remarkably complex. I mean, what's so difficult to get a box, put some racks in it that pre-beekeepers, for some reason, always call frames racks, R-A-C-K-S. So get a box, put some frames in it, buy a package of bees, release the queen. I mean, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're a beekeeper. But the devil is always in the details, the nuances. Is this a good queen? Is this a disease? Is this chalk brood? Why are these bees stinging so often? The devil is in the complex details. The overall infrastructure of beekeeping is simple. I wish that you would, from dependable sources, acquire information and experience that is sound. That puts a lot of pressure on you. Evaluate your sources to be sure that you're getting information that's useful to you and that will help you grow and that won't require you to backtrack to go back and correct some various things. There's a lot of loud authorities out there now that are really speaking up. So you've got to sift through the loud authorities that are correct and delete the loud authorities that you don't particularly agree with at that time. So it requires you to be shrewd. And there's many alternatives right now. If there were the alternative to end all alternatives, we would all be doing it. So pick and choose the various aspects of beekeeping that you like: hive design, Varroa Management, where you get your queens. Those are all your alternatives to choose from. But you can't choose all. So pick and choose the ones that are important to you. So I end where I started. For most of us, keep it simple. It's been my observation that successful beekeepers who do a decent job of keeping their hives alive when they're brand new do keep it simple. And then as they grow in experience and expertise, they become more sophisticated. They add pollen traps. They might do some things with their queens, raise some queens. They run slatted racks. They begin to do some more interesting aspects of beekeeping. But then it's been my observation now, as I'm just recently 68 years old, that I like to go back to being simple again. Stuff's heavy, too many parts, hard to keep up with, and I got grandkids all mixed in that mix. So you start out simple, you kind of go complex, you thrive in beekeeping, grow in beekeeping, and then as time passes, you're probably going to kind of drift back towards simplicity again. Ultimately, you're responsible for helping your bees in that box. I'll say it now, and I'll say it several more times. Bees in that beehive that looks so normal and so common to us is not normal and common to the bees. It's remarkably abnormal to the bees. But they're able to exist many times quite well. But increasingly, they depend on you to do quite well. So keep it simple for you and the bees as best you can. but realize that you're working with livestock, wildlife, whatever, that's not perfectly suited for the equipment that we're keeping it in. More about that in a bit. Monitor your colony judiciously. I'm probably going to edit this program to say consistently, because one of the things that I personally have the most problem with is consistency. More about that later, too. So make colony opens a combined task event. So when you've got them open, check the queen. When you got them open, check to be sure you're not seeing any punctured cappings. When you've got them open, look closely for signs of varroa, bees with twisted wings. Look at the brood pattern. Do as many things as you can. But don't open these bees and tinker constantly. Don't go out just on a whim on Tuesday afternoon, nice day, and think I'll open my bees and have a look. That disrupts the colonies. You are the bee's #1 predator. You are the most advanced and sophisticated predator that the bees have to deal with, and so when you keep opening them, you disrupt their ability to forage successfully. So keep these tasks combined. Primarily, if you're a new beekeeper, I'll give you 3 years minimum, 5 years maximum. That's just my silly opinion, my recommendation. You've got to learn to keep bees. So for the first 3 years, no more than 5, go out there and do dumb things. Open the colony whenever you want. Watch comb being built. Watch the first drones emerge. Do all of that. But by the time you've been doing this for about 5 years or so, you should have that out of your system. So beyond that, be as brief in the openings as much as possible. And get in, do what you got to do, and get out. You're probably going to do that on a nice day, aren't you? I bet none of you go out and say, I think I'm going to open my bees today and have a look. It's a gray, dreary, rainy day, so I'm going to go open my colonies. Most of us choose a day that's bright, sunshiny, and clear, and those are probably the days that the bees need to forage and to get ready for the upcoming season. So help the bees, but don't hinder them by opening so often that they're really set back and cannot set by stores and build a population up and maintain colony health that they're going to need to get through the upcoming dearth season, winter. But get the job done correctly. When you open it up, don't just smash bees, slam bees, bump, dump, and get out, and then not really having checked things. Be brief and be as efficient as you can. This next topic, use smoke. Use it limitedly and as much as needed. I'm on record as really wishing that some clever person out there, anybody, could find an alternative to smoke. Could be an entire discussion for me. I'm had asthma as a kid. It's still latent. It doesn't take a lot of smoke for asthma tendencies, asthma feelings to return to me. It makes my eyes bleary. I've got a strong suspicion that it's doing the same thing to bees, too. I've got some information from a chemist that I cannot yet publish until an article is completely released in the American Bee Journal on the harm, the risk, the concern about using pine needles as smoke and the resins and tars that are given off in that smoke. So here's the deal. We have no other alternative but to use smoke. But I don't think that smoke is good for us or the bees in great quantities. So be as judicial as possible. Some of the best fuels for smoke that produce the least byproducts and toxins apparently is wheat straw. Wheat straw. WHEATSTRAW. So I guess that would be a decent one to use. There's not a lot of byproducts. So don't be causing your bees particular illnesses, setbacks, contamination by smoking them crazily, having them roaring out of the front of the hive, coughing, gagging, sneezing. Use it only as much as you can and let both of you stay downstream of it as much as possible. I don't know any alternatives. I know. You can use sugar syrup spray. I got some hives in the backyard right now. If you go back there and spray sugar syrup on them, they're going to think you're nutso. And they will light you up, and they will light up my neighbor on his lawnmower. So I don't know of anything at this point that you can use besides smoke, but it's kind of an accursed thing. But there it is. I'll cut it short, and I'll move to this. You need to anticipate colony needs. Now, as I've said before, this gadget, this hive, suits our needs as beekeepers. It's too close to the ground, entrance is in the wrong place, frames are too straight, it's too big. There's all kind of things about this colony that would not fit in an empty cavity inside a tree. We don't want that unit to swarm. We want to suppress all swarming. To the bees, that's cockamamie. They want to swarm 6 or 7 times a year. They want a colony cavity space that's about the size of a shallow super here. So just about that much of that bottom deep is all they'd want for a cavity space. And then beyond that, they would swarm away every chance they got. Statistically, they have a better chance of surviving genetically if they've got 5, 6, 8 swarms out there than they are to put all their eggs in this big beehive basket. Now, having said that, that means that you, the beekeeper, to help this colony survive in a nest format they would not naturally build themselves, have to anticipate what this colony is going to need in this modern beehive. The hive space and appropriate equipment should be set up so that you can practice the fundamentals of beekeeping. Keep it simple. You need to feed carbohydrates and pollen supplements as the bees will take it and as they need it. Every spring isn't great. We know more and more that due to herbicide use across the country, that these pesticides, these chemicals are reducing the amount of food products to these beehives. So feed them and provide them with pollen. Keep it about 18 inches off the ground. Mine is not. I'm working on that. So animals don't harass them all night. Correct comb structure and comb maintenance so you don't kill and destroy bees when you open it up. And appropriate procedures is just a catch-all. Have you closed the screen bottom board? Have you opened it? Did you reverse the inner cover for winter preparations? Is the queen excluder still on? You've got to take care of all of that. So you need to help these bees stay alive by doing what your part of the task is, since you're keeping these bees in an abnormal situation for them. As with smoke, I could spend an hour talking about water. I don't know if we're doing enough. I don't know if we're concerned enough about water. Somehow, like pollen, bees just go out and find it. We don't know how much for sure. We don't know how often they need to collect water. I'm not always sure when they go to get it, but I know this. First listing, I want you to have a dependable water source in the area. If you got a pond, or if you're near natural streams or whatever, fine, you're good to go. In my backyard here, the only alternative water sources that my bees have is my neighbor's swimming pool and my neighbor's bird watering devices. I've heard about both. So I keep a child's swimming pool. I have trouble keeping my grandkids out of it in my backyard, and I keep it full of water. They don't always go for the cleanest sources. Sources that are not just as pure as snow melt may have a better odor, may have more of a taste. It may be easier to recruit foragers to find water that's slightly, or in sometimes heavily soiled. Bees will collect this stuff, water, even except in deep winter and heavy rain. It's almost comical. I've watched bees fly to my water source the whole time they're being rained on. Alternatively, I've seen bees fly to my water source when it was 40 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and all you experienced people know that we should have been clustered at 56. So I don't know why they're doing it. I don't know why those bees are making suicide flights. I fished them out of frozen water, And in some of the pictures, the frozen water over here would actually have a thaw area around where the bees had kept the water thawed all night with their body temperature. Actually, these bees are still alive if I fish them out of that ice water and bring them back to life. So I don't know why they're making those suicide flights. I know they can use metabolic water. I know it's in all the literature. I would ask anyone, has anyone ever actually seen bees collect water inside the hive? I don't think we have. But we always say, and until I can think about it more, maybe find reasons why or why not, that they probably do use internal hive moisture. A lot of this is in response to humidity. The bees really need a high humidity, 40 to 60, 70%, to raise brood. If that humidity is not there, the only way they can raise humidity in the spring is to eat honey, because we get our colonies vented. So it's one of those things. If you don't vent, too much moisture. If you vent too much, they're going to have to eat honey to produce humidity. The actual requirement for water isn't clearly known. So I'm back to where I started. To keep your bees alive, until we know more about this, provide a dependable water source. Water sometimes is just a solvent. Look at these bees on this muck. And all they're doing is probably collecting natural salts, minerals, or whatever. So to help keep your bees alive, be sure they have water as convenient to them as it can be, and don't let it run dry. You need to monitor queen condition and queen productivity. Something is wrong with our queens. They're not as viable as they used to be, or alternatively, and probably more likely, something is wrong with our drones. We all know that mites favor the drones, so I'm in no position to tell you what's going on except this. The queens have significantly changed. We used to say requeen every 2 years. Queens can go 3 to 5 years. I can't say that now. You're probably going to have to requeen at least every other year. So replace as needed. What a broad comment that is, but I have to make it. You have to decide when it's needed. You can't just run out every time whimsically, buy a queen for 25, 30 bucks now sometimes, and come back and change. Sometimes good or slightly less than good is as good as you're going to get. So see, this is where the keeping your bees alive thing becomes an issue. You can't keep beautiful, perfect queens all the time. And if it's August and you got a queen that's suspect, you wish she was more productive, you think the season justifies more productivity, so do you buy a queen or not? Well, if you buy a queen, she's probably been in storage since last spring. I'm uncomfortable with that. If your colony is queenless outright and you have no way to requeen it, certainly buy one. So requeening and replacing as needed is going to be one of the demanding things that you have to do. You're going to have to know also that this queen over here is going to have variation about her quality. She may be better or worse than the queen in the hive beside it. It's just bee life. You will never have 10 colonies exactly alike, even though I told you in the first slide to try to do that. It's still an admirable goal, but you're going to lose. You need to understand requeening techniques too, because you're performing hive surgery. So expect seasonal queen production variation. One colony is going to produce a major honey crop. The colony next to it is going to be okay. Some of the colonies in the yard produce nothing. Some are off the charts. That's very typical in this situation that we've got bees working in. Allow the bees to grow their own. This can be done. My dad was always a firm proponent of this, but it's going to take 6 to 7 weeks from the day the bees started until the day that worker bees emerge. So allow them to grow their own. It's time consuming. Impatience is common. At least teach yourself to produce cells if you possibly can. That'll help a lot. That comes with experience. Requeening with cells is cheaper, much, much cheaper, and cuts the time commitment dramatically. Monitor all hive diseases. The one that you really have to always monitor is Varroa. I mean, we've gotten used to it. Varroa is actually now an old pest. It's been here since the mid-'80s, but it's still pretty much the pest it ever was. I've labeled that as critical. So when you open it up, be looking for all hive diseases. Do what you can. Environmental pesticides, I know some of you are really worked up over those, the neonics and the other common insecticides, but you should know we've always had pesticides we didn't like. 7-XLR, malathion. It goes back to the first days of pesticides. Ironically, the one that gave us the least trouble was DDT. And no, I'm not suggesting that anybody use that again. I am saying that environmental pesticides have always been an issue for us. I also want you to know under this category that there are natural toxins in the environment that bees are subjected to. So even if this bee never saw any man-made toxins, there's still plants out there that produce toxins that are not kind to these bees. Your in-hive pesticides, if we didn't do that, in many cases, Varroa would run over us. Follow label instructions, because if you're putting this stuff inside the beehive, you need to put it in correctly. I have a lot of trouble with this one. I have every intention of replacing my combs every 3 to 5 years. I even date my combs when I put new frames in with a magic marker. And it's a rare thing for me to take one out. It's just so hard to take out a perfectly functional comb and then put a new one in for no other reason than it's gotten old. If you don't have healthy bees going into winter, if everything we just discussed didn't work, then this is probably going to be for nothing. Even in a mild winter, they're going to be stressed to survive. So send them into the winter well stocked with food, pollen. I have in the past left ridiculous amounts of honey on the colony, only to have to take that honey off of dead beehives and do something with it. So just an exorbitant amount of honey won't save the day. The bees have to be healthy. The food's got to be in the correct position so the bees can move up on it. That's the oddity of the hive equipment that we use. We used to pack and winterize our bees much more than we do now. There's entire books, pamphlets, early 20s. Even the bee supply companies made insulated hives. And now more and more I wonder if the insulated hives are going to come back due to some of the expanded polystyrene hives that we're using. Ventilation is going to be an issue in any beehives, especially the insulated hives, because that expanded polystyrene does not absorb water and it rains back on the bees. So on one hand, insulate. On the other hand, don't let the bees get wet. A lot of you folks, I don't know any commercial companies doing it, but a lot of you people who have engineering backgrounds are working on various heating devices that will help the bees winter. So help the bees as much as you can get through the winter period. Even those folks we're talking to here that are in the nice warm climates, you're still going to have a period of dearth, flight, and colony decline during that period. Lastly, expect dead bees at the hive entrance. The question is, how many? You see, these bees that are dead over here in front of my hive are basically the senior class of bees that died off to make way for the freshman class of bees that's coming in. The queen essentially lays brood patterns that are of similar ages. Not exactly the same age, it takes her days to do it, weeks, but you're going to see these bees begin to die off at roughly the same time because they were roughly produced at the same time. Does that make sense? So expect to see some dead bees out front. If you go have a look at your wintering colony and there's been no heavy snow, no rain, no nothing, and you see no bees whatsoever, there's a chance that colony is either dead already, or much less likely, it is absolutely wintering perfectly. The chances are much more likely that it's already dead. So expect colony dead bees at the hive entrance, but don't expect just half the bees in the hive. In late winter, there can be a lot of bees piled up out there. We see it in the snow. You folks who don't commonly have snow don't always know how many bees are actually dying. It's shocking to see bees tossing and tumbling on the snow 50, 75 yards away from the hive. So expect that. My point here, keeping your bees alive, is that you need for these bees to go into the colonies to the winter healthy and productive. And then everything else is just details. Provide food, provide the food correctly, pack them, ventilate them, maybe insulation, experiment, expect some dead bees, but everything is to go into the winter with healthy bees. When you manage your bees, you try to win as often as you can, but you have to expect to lose sometimes. It's the bee cycle of life. This bee right here that I'm showing in my final slide never saw winter. She only saw spring, the spring season, into summer. Her 3 to 5 weeks was up. No bee inside the colony sees the whole seasonal picture. So this 3 to 5 week thing means that these bees die quite commonly and quite frequently. I can't speak for the bees, but I wouldn't think it's a big shock. It is a shock for us, though. So the primary things you can do to help your bees are to do the things I've discussed. For those of you who are brand new to beekeeping, I want to tell you, because some of you need just out of the chaos, I want you to control mites. If you're new to beekeeping, use in-hive pesticides correctly. Watch the queen so you can prevent swarming and brood loss. Prepare them correctly for the winter. And expect some of your hives to give you trouble, to have diseases, or even die. But otherwise, work with them because they're in an artificial environment. Denise, I'm finished. Back to you.
Okay, Jim, great. We have questions coming in already. So Jennifer wants to know what your Varroa management techniques are, or control techniques are.
What was the name again, Denise, that I'm talking to?
Jennifer.
Jennifer, I'm trying to change. I have written a couple of articles about oxalic acid, about dribble techniques. It's the flavor of the year. No doubt next year there'll be something new. There was something new last year. But I'm tinkering with oxalic acid dribble, and I have used oxalic acid in the vaporized form a couple of times. It's got some bad press, and if you're going to use it, you certainly should protect yourself, wearing a proper ventilator. But I'm using that right now. Alternatively, I'm also removing drone brood. And one of those things I use is not real common, is mite zappers. It's what? Mite zappers. I like them because they're innovative gadgets. It's an electrically heated drone frame that goes inside your colony, and then on periodic intervals, very specifically, you go and you attach a 12-volt battery to it, and it kills the drone. It kills the drones that has the attached mites. So those two techniques are the ones that I'm tinkering with primarily. I really put a lot of pressure on the oxalic acid. In the past, I've used basically everything just to be able to talk about it. The thing I would drop back to if I felt neither of those were working would be some kind of formic acid compound. But that's just me. Some people don't want to use anything. They'd rather do nothing and replace bees. So whatever fits your personality and your philosophy. Thanks for the question.
Jim, I was talking with some beekeepers last week, and they were smoking with skunk cabbage leaves, with the idea that because skunk cabbage has calcium oxalate as a toxin, a natural toxin in the plant, that somehow that would transfer into benefit for the mites. Have you heard of that, or do you have any thoughts on that? Doesn't seem like there'd be enough in what you smoke unless you were causing asthma attacks, like you said. But do you have any comments on that?
Give me just a second to rumble through my ever-increasing, slowly functioning brain. I don't remember any information that I would have about that. That would be interesting, though. When you were saying that, I'm not sure what chemical it was that you cited, but oxalic acid occurs in a lot of plants naturally. So, can I leave that as a maybe? Don't
Sure.
breathe it. Well, let me leave that as a maybe. That's an interesting question that I can't conclusively support or trash. Interesting. So, go slowly. Don't kill yourself and your bees, but see how it works. I've never used skunk cabbage as a smoke source.
Andy has a question about your thoughts on hop garden. I guess I've heard the same thing about hops, about people wanting to use hops leaves in smokers.
I don't mind hop garden. You know, I'm sorry, Denise. Are you still talking?
Go ahead, Jim. It's you.
The few times I've used hops, they're fine. I found that most of those older compounds, older now being 3 or 4 years ago, are going to be about 40, no more than 60% effective. That's not bad. If you can get that, that'll keep the mites below the economic threshold. So hop guard never showed itself to be the end-all pesticide for mites, but it was always solid. It did its part. So if you like the components from which it's derived, it's fine. I've got it back in my back barn right now where the bees are, but I just haven't used it in a while because these newer products are out. Hop guard, in my opinion, when I was using it 2-3 years ago, seemed to do as well as anything else. So if you like the fact that it's from hops, have at it. It's fine.
Okay, Alan wonders what method you use for swarm prevention, and then Mel has a swarm question as well about lemongrass oil as a bait to catch swarms.
Wow, my swarm prevention techniques have been horrible. So everything I tell you that I've been doing, I wish you wouldn't do. If you follow my advice of not opening the hives whimsically and all the time, then you're almost definitely going to run into swarming if you put in good queens like I told you to do. So it's a conundrum. On one hand, if you do everything positive, you're going to have great bee populations and they're going to swarm away. So you have to expect that, and the only thing I know of you can do is to make splits and divides. Well, at some point, you started with 2 hives of bees and now you got 500 and you're still splitting and dividing. That's probably not going to be an ultimately good recommendation. The thing I've always tried to do is to know when the bees are clustered out front strongly and early spring that population's always crowded. Now, you can rip into that beehive at great inconvenience to yourself and the bees and try to tear down queen cells, destroy the swarm cells. Number one, be sure they haven't swarmed already, because if you tear down the cells after they've swarmed, then they're going to be queenless. Number two, even if you rip into them and tear down swarm cells, you're going to miss one. I'll guarantee you, I'll promise, in that thick mat of bees and all those frames, you're going to miss one. So, the best you can do to prevent swarming, number one, know that the bees innately are crazy to swarm. We're the ones who don't want them to do it. The bees don't want to swarm just once. They want to swarm multiple times per year. So when you see the bees in early spring already building up, matting out front, that's a proper colony to divide, just to keep the bees in your box and off your neighbor's lawn or out of the creek bottom down below. And then if you don't want those extra numbers, after the swarming season is kind of passed and everything's settled down, then combine them back with the other bees and you've still got the bees there. And you may even get a new queen out of the deal if they produced a queen while they were doing it. So swarming is a problem. It's a positive problem. I just read my own article in Bee Culture this month where I unintentionally picked up 4 swarms. And it's very exciting, but hard to control. It's very hard to control for biological reasons. There is no good way. I'm sorry.
Okay, Scott says you mentioned correct winter stores arrangement in the hive and asks if you can elaborate.
What I want you to do with that is have the honey stores directly above the wintering cluster. In general, inside artificial domiciles like our hives, the bees have a tendency to move upward. In fact, if you live in a snow area, if you'll go out and look on top of your probably 2 deeps that you wintered, there will sometimes be a melted circle right above the handhold beneath the outer cover where they've actually melted the snow off. So the bees move directly upward. So if you do make one of those rare winter inspections and you found that the bees are kind of moving into the middle and they've used that honey and now the honey is on the outside frames, if you gently can, without upsetting the bees and cracking propolis loose, move those frames over more closely toward that wintering cluster. But if you think you're going to cause grief and foment, better left undone. But make that food, that winter store of honey, as convenient to the wintering cluster as you possibly can, without breaking that cluster or tormenting the bees during deep winter. It's all you can do. So it's going to be a tough call.
And Dan has a related question. He wants to know how much honey to leave on the hive.
I've left crazy amounts just hoping that would somehow make things all better. If you're in Ohio, where we are now, you probably want 60, 65 pounds of honey and 2 deeps, at the most 2 deeps in a super. If you're in a warmer climate, you can get away with a lot less, 35 to 40 pounds, but they're still going to use honey during the winter to take searching flights for food that's not there. So you folks in warmer climates have the advantage because it's easier for you to feed. Those of us in colder climates and snow areas, we're probably going to leave around 55 to 65 pounds. If you want to be sure, leave 75 pounds. This is bad advice, but we all do it. Those of us have done it for a long time. On a bright day, as winter's approaching and you think you've got your colony ready for winter, and it's in just 2 deeps, and you're an average person and you've done this before, go to the back of the hive, tip it from the bottom handhold. If it feels like dead weight, if it feels like it's just completely nailed down, that's a rough estimation that it's okay. If you can easily tip it, that's not good. And you need to realize that if your hive stand is something of a fulcrum, that's going to throw off your measurement. The hive needs to be sitting solidly on the hive stand. Not just if you're a lightweight, a lighter person, smaller person. If you tip and kind of get used to what it feels like to you, you can get a rough estimation for how much honey is there. But basically, have the bees in the bottom deep with a frame or 2 of honey on the outside frames, and then have about 9 frames of honey up top. Would be enough to get through traditional winters.
Okay, Bill asks, when do you start to move your bees down to prepare for winter?
Oh, I'm going to be taking off honey. I'm probably a week or 2 late. It's been so hot. Please give me some mercy on that. I'm going to take off my honey, and then I'm going to treat them with oxalic acid for Varroa. And then I'm going to see how many bees amass out front. If there's just tens of thousands of bees stuck out front, I'm going to add an extra deep back to that just to give them a place to get out of the weather. And then as goldenrod starts in the fall, I'm going to watch that empty deep that I added. Goldenrod in my area has a delightful stink. You can smell it 100 yards away when the bees are making goldenrod honey. And then I'm going to watch that, and if they need more supers, I will add that to it. I really don't want a lot of goldenrod honey. It's not considered to be bouquet banquet type honey. But at the same time, I don't want to crowd the bees down. I'd rather have it for the bee food to winter on. So what I told you is that I'm going to strip the honey off that I've got right now that is more suitable for human consumption. I'm going to monitor the bees' activity out front, large population. I'm going to put a deep or even more to get the bees back inside the hive. As August passes and fall flowers begin to come in, I'm going to monitor how fast they fill those empty deeps I put on and add more or not as necessary. And then I don't extract that. I use that fall feed to give back to the bees for winter stores. I hope that helps.
Okay, Terry asks if you can speak on the effects of on the hive of this incredibly hot weather.
If the bees have water, they're okay. I went out last night I'm going to be sending a picture. I tried to photograph my bees after dark. Just for grins, if you're in hot weather, go out and look at your bees at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And I think you'll be surprised at how many bees are sitting out on the front porch. That's a simple way that they have to lower the internal hive temperature, just to get out of it. Leave the hive. They're all at home at night. Most bees are not flying or bivouacking. So they're all back at home. There's no real space for them except matted out front. So they can get along in the heat. They survive in Arizona. They survive in Central America, Mexico. So they can survive here, but you really need to have water for them. I hammered on that. I've seen bees just invade cattle watering sites in Arizona, so much so that farmers would complain that the cattle couldn't get to the watering sites because of the bees. So be sure they have water. Vent the hives. If you're in a hot climate, you're south of Kentucky, stagger the supers backwards, 3/8, half an inch, and give those bees ventilation sites between those colony fixtures, and they'll be all right if they have water.
Okay, we skipped the lemongrass oil for baiting, and Debbie also adds for any reason to use lemongrass oil.
Well, one reason to use lemongrass oil is it just smells good. I mean, compared to what beekeepers usually smell like, lemongrass oil is a pretty good alternative. So just keep that stuff in your pocket for other reasons. Secondly, thirdly, whatever it is, yes, lemongrass oil does seem to help bait trap hives. So if you're trying to lure swarms to trap hives, it's very common to smear lemongrass oil around inside the hive to see if it'll help colonies that are about to swarm and are undecided on a cavity site. So not a thing in the world wrong with it. It's a derivative of a more complicated concoction that had four, I've forgotten what the chemicals were now, but had 4 different materials that gave it that lemon smell. But I understand you can go to the grocery store and pretty much buy this stuff anywhere. So yes, it helps, but it doesn't guarantee, but it certainly helps. So use it for several reasons.
Okay, Jeff asks your thoughts on breaking brood cycle to control Varroa.
When I make divides, that breaks that brood cycle, and that does help. And so you can eliminate a treatment or so until the bees build back up, until the mites recover. But then the season has passed, and so the mites are somewhat held back. The same thing happens when those bees swarm. It breaks the mites cycle. So even though the swarm may have flown away, at least you got a brood cycle break, and that'll help knock the mites back down. They will build back up, but probably never to the population that they would have been, enough to cause this mite collapse that occurs, about the 3rd week in August or so. So brood cycle breaks are good. If you're inclined and you've got a small number of hives, just cage the queen and leave her inside the colony, keep her caged. Break the brood cycle up, set them back. It adds to the overall control of Varroa. If you've got screen bottoms, that helps. If you're using brood cycle breaks, that'll help too. If you're going to be using hop guard or something else, that's good. So you're trying to keep the bees knocked down below an economic threshold. Everybody in the world that I know of at this time has given up on any kind of eradication of Varroa. We're just trying to keep them now below a costly level, an economic threshold. Yes, brood cycle breaking is good for disrupting Varroa mite life cycles and population buildups.
Okay, great. And Jim, for our last question, Ben asks about Apagard and resistance to Apagard.
With any of these compounds that you use, HopGuard, Apagard, and whatever, you need to have 2 and phase them out, change them over, and then always be watching those 2. I like Apagard. I've used it too. I like it as much as I can. You know what I mean, don't you? I like it because it does what it's supposed to do at 40%. But don't use it every time. Change it back and forth. And then over time, maybe the mites will build up a resistance to both, and then at that point you change to something else. But don't just use it straight. And to everyone who's still listening, don't pick out something that you really like, a chemical, compound, a chemical control agent, and just stick with that. It's not going to work indefinitely, no matter what. So, yes, Pagar is good. Alternatively, use something else that you like and can tolerate with your beekeeping management philosophy, and then trade those off back and forth, and you should get a good number of years out of it. 5, 6, before you begin to sense that you're getting mite buildups anyway.